I can't really top that. So that'll be on YouTube later. So you could all go back and watch it again later if you want to. And then remember that after church today, the Sunday school kids are all invited into a breakout room. All invited to a breakout room. So we'll figure that out at the end of church. As I was reading over all of our Bible passages this week, I kept being drawn to the story of Moses and the Israelites in the desert. The Israelites, you might remember, are no longer slaves. They no longer have to work for the Egyptians for free, but they are wandering around in the desert under the direction of Moses. And the thing that they do is start complaining a lot, really loudly, because they might have a bunch of freedom, but they are in the desert. God does several things with this story, but at the end of the story, what God does is make sure that everybody has enough to eat, that everybody has manna, that people's basic human needs are being met through their trial in the desert. And the thing that struck me is that we have been invited to wander in the desert a little bit as a congregation and as the institutional church. We are no longer slaves to the way we've always done things and avoiding technology and computers and all of the things that we always used to do. And yet, without all of those things, without all of the ways that we've always done things, without all of the things that we are deeply, deeply grieving the loss of and missing, some of us want to complain and say, but church isn't the way I understand it anymore. Church isn't the way that I like it anymore. I hate this online thing. I miss seeing people in person. I miss hugs and I miss community and I miss hearing everybody's voices in song. And I want to be very clear that there are two things that can both go on at the same time. One of the things is that we can be deeply grieving that church is not the way that we remember it, the way we understand it, the way we like it. We might be missing it a lot. I have to let you know, I am tired of knowing most of you only through a computer screen and cannot wait until we can gather again in person. And yet I'm so afraid that that is going to be a lot longer than any of us want it to be. There is a really important thing here about the grief process. It's important that we say, I am angry and I am sad and I really miss church the way that it was and the way we've always done things because I loved it that way. That is the way that I knew God. That is the way I had my social time. That is the way that I connected with other people. It is important to name the anger, the sadness, the grief, how upset we feel, and how much we miss being in Egypt, how much we missed being bound by all of those things because they made sense to us. It was a world we understood. It is a world the church has lived in for 70 years or so. We got it, and now we're without it. We are so much like these Israelites wandering in the wilderness. And while it is very important that we take the grief very seriously and that we grieve collectively as a group and we tell each other, I'm really sad we can't do church the way that we used to. I really miss church. I really miss the sanctuary. I really miss all of the social things we did and seeing my friends all the time. That is important and that is good. And at the same time, just like with the Israelites, I think that we can be invited in this story to look around us and see how God is providing for our everyday needs, how God is providing many of us ways to continue to stay connected to each other, how God is taking care of us, and how God might be using this time in the desert to invite us into a new way of thinking about church, or a new way of being church, or a new way of sharing the gospel. That doesn't mean that the way we shared the gospel before, that there was anything wrong with it. It doesn't mean that the way we shared the gospel before didn't work. It doesn't mean that there aren't some things that we have always done that are good and healthy and will work today. But the invitation to a life of discipleship in Jesus isn't all about what I want or what I'm comfortable with. It's about how are we as a community taking care of one another? How are we demonstrating the love of Jesus for one another? How are we meeting each other's basic human needs for food and shelter like God did with the Israelites in the wilderness? How are we providing manna for one another? And how are we using this time to think about all of the ways that God might be ready to share the gospel in a radically new and different way? There is both deep grief and an invitation in this story. An invitation to acknowledge the grief, but move past to the complaining into seeing what God is doing, to seeing the new things that God is doing, to being aware of all of the ways that we can understand how to share the gospel in ways that we never thought possible before. Never in a million years did I dream that I would be doing church from the corner of my bedroom. And yet here we are, and people are logging in. Never in a million years did I dream that I'd had 3 weeks of in-person worship and then try to figure out how to do church online together. And yet we're doing it. And yet God has provided the manna. And it's not what we're used to, but it's important. And it allows us to share the gospel in new and different ways. Right now, sharing the gospel can be as simple as clicking like or share or inviting someone or mailing them a YouTube link. God took care of the Israelites in the desert. And God took care of the workers in the vineyard. If the vineyard owner is like God, then what the vineyard owner has done is said, I think that everybody deserves to eat at the end of a day. The daily living wage under the culture at the time was enough for you to feed your family for a day. And so even if someone started working at 5 p.m. at night, ethically and morally, in the economy of God, like Miss Ann was telling us, in the economy of God, there are not these distinctions. In the economy of God, everybody gets enough to eat at the end of the day. I think it is so fascinating that when Jesus wants to get a spiritual point across, often he uses an example of economics. I think it's important to ask ourselves some questions about the economy and how it works. I think it's important that we think about, as a community, how are we living out our discipleship? How are we modeling ourselves in the image of a God who provides manna in the wilderness, even when people are upset, even when it's hard, even when we're deeply grieving? God provided manna in the wilderness. For the workers in the vineyard, even though some people weren't picked at the beginning of the day or had to walk a lot longer to the meeting spot to pick up the workers. In the economy of God, the vineyard owner says everybody gets enough to eat at the end of the day. The thing is, sometimes when everybody gets enough to eat, people who have always had enough to eat feel like something is being taken away from them. I know we feel like church has been taken away from us right now. And I know that we are being invited into doing something new. But sometimes when certain things happen, it seems like something is being taken away. If the vineyard owner had more than enough money, the person who started in the morning getting the same amount of money as the person who started at 5 in the evening, it doesn't actually affect the person in the morning. The person in the morning got the wage they agreed to, and the person who comes in the evening gets the wage that they have been agreed to, the wage they have been promised to have enough to eat for the day. Nothing at all has actually been taken away from the people who came the first thing in the morning. As many of you may know, a very famous Supreme Court Justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, died on Friday. And one of the things she did was work for gender equality. Because of her, I can work. Because of her, I was able to sign up for my own credit card in college. Because of her, I could sign up for my own bank accounts. Because of her, I can consent to my own medical treatments. And yet, when she fought court battles that gave women the ability to do all of these things without men signing for them or doing it for them, when she gave them the ability to buy their own cars or buy their own houses, men felt like something was being taken away from them. We as a family watched a movie called On the Basis of Sex last night that was about gender discrimination and the ways that Ruth Bader Ginsburg started the fight for that and all of the court cases that ended up going to the Supreme Court. When women were given rights to own property and have bank accounts and have their own credit cards, many men felt like something was being taken away from them. Many others looked at the Constitution and said, if all people are created equal, then if men should get to do this, women should get to do this too. The reality is, we live in a world where not everybody is treated equal based on the economy. Ruth Bader Ginsburg fought for that a lot. Maybe some of you know also that she is Jewish. And one of the ways that we honor Jewish people who have passed is by saying, may her memory be a blessing, which means may we all be blessed to see what equality is like, to see what equality can do. All of the Israelites, the children, the babies, and the people who had lived in slavery for 50 years were given manna in the wilderness by God and given enough to eat. All of the vineyard workers were given enough to feed their families at the end of the day. God's economy doesn't look like our economy. As Miss Ann said, God's economy doesn't divide us into us and them. God's economy says everybody should have their basic human needs met. Even when we're afraid, even when we're complaining, even when we don't think we want what we have. Maybe we all think, and I'm sure most of us feel deep in our heart, the grief that we don't have church the way that we want it. But at the end of the day, most of us have our basic needs met. Most of us have Bibles in our homes. Most of us have the ability to pray. Most of us have the ability to be manna for each other. Most of us have the ability to be the vineyard owner for each other. One of the things we can do is both acknowledge and take seriously our grief and take seriously God's economy that says that everyone should have enough to eat and that it's people's job to care for each other, that it's people's job to take care of each other. And that even if we have all kinds of feelings about some people getting things that they want, well, we don't get what we want. God invites us to a higher purpose. God invites us to look outside of ourselves at helping everyone find ways to meet their needs and at looking at ourselves as an entire community that works together without being jealous of what other people have that we don't. We live in a complicated world. The grief over Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death is deep. The grief over us not being in church together is deep. And while we get to acknowledge all of that, we can look at Ruth's life and we can say, you know what? She constantly worked for everyone to have enough. We can look at God in the wilderness and say, God constantly worked for everyone to have enough. We can look at the owner of the vineyard and say, if Jesus says this is what the economy of God is like, in God's economy, everyone has enough and everyone is invited to share. And so I invite you today in your discipleship to think about the ways that you are sharing the gospel, the ways that you are sharing manna with others, the ways that you are inviting people to hear the good news of Jesus for the first time. And then when they show up with their different ideas or their different questions, not being jealous because you've been in church your whole life and you feel like you should get to go to heaven more than people that we are about to invite to join us. I would invite you to model yourself today in the image of the God who makes sure everyone has enough to eat, that everyone, even if they come at the last minute, gets fully included. I would invite you to offer to God your grief, cry your tears about it, feel your feelings about it, and then think about what is God inviting you to do today? What is God inviting you to do to make the economy of God a reality on this earth, both in economic terms and in spiritual terms, and in the terms of inviting people to come and hear the gospel through the Lutheran Church of Martha and Mary? God promises to comfort us in our grief, to make sure we have what we need, and then invites us to use that strength, that promise that we have what we need, that we are invited into the economy of God, to invite others so that we can share in the kingdom of God with them. Thanks be to God that God is big enough to invite us to move from grief to invitation. That God is big enough to invite us from thinking about what others have that we don't, and to take that from us so that we can move on to a place where we invite and share with others as much as we possibly can. And thanks be to God that we have the promise of Jesus. And no matter how hard we are working for the kingdom, no matter how easy it is for us or hard it is for us to think about these Bible stories in these ways and receive this invitation from God to deeper discipleship, no matter how that is for us, how good we are at it or how bad we are at it, God promises to love us, to forgive us, and to be here for us. God was there for all the Israelites. God is there for all of the workers in the vineyard. And we can trust that as we move to a space of invitation, God is here for us as well. Amen.